we have in the Upper Basin absolutely no reason to have any sympathy for California on this issue at all. It not only has it abused the interstate compact by taking more water out of the Colorado River than it's entitled to for 75 years. Not only that, but also California sits on 800 miles of coastline on the largest body of water on Earth. So for them to come to Colorado, which is desperately water short, and say we need more of your water is just plain silly. And for us to even entertain the concept of that is a huge threat to the future of Colorado.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke. And for this week's show, we're going to do something a little bit different here. We want to talk about a very important topic in Colorado, but one that doesn't always get talked so much about on this show, PowerGab, where we're very energy focused. So I'll kick it to you, Amy, to sort of tee up the show and introduce our very special guest.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this, Jake, because Independence Institute does have an energy and environmental policy center. And that means we should be touching on environmental topics, but it seems like energy always dominates. But in this case, and today we want to talk about water. And the important thing about it, besides, I get questions about what's going on with the Colorado River Compact. Why is Nebraska suing Colorado? Data centers use a lot of water. They need water. So water is becoming more and more of an issue as we're hearing about the flow from the Colorado River, which feeds some 7 different states, and I think New Mexico and the state, a little bit of Mexico. So there's no better person to have on the show today to talk about this than my friend Greg Walcher, who was the director of Colorado's Natural Resources Department, and he's also a Western Slope resident, so we get a Western Slope perspective as well as a Colorado perspective. With that, I'm thrilled to have Greg on the show. Greg, real quick, why don't you introduce yourself, and then what do Coloradans, especially people who are new to the state, what do they need to know about water in the state of Colorado?
Well, thank you, Amy. It's great to be with you, and I appreciate being invited. The most difficult thing about water, and I've dealt with it most of my life, working a decade on Capitol Hill and a decade of running Club 20, the years that I spent in the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, and all the years since then as a writer, a newspaper columnist, and member of 100 boards and commissions and so on. It always seemed to me like the hardest thing about water is convincing our own people to stay up in arms about it year after year after year. It seems like every week or so you open the newspaper and see there's a new study saying we're all running out of water and we all have to use less water. And I always say it's difficult when you say to people they're going to on the Western Slope we say Denver's about to take all our water, or in all of Colorado you can say California is about to take all the water and the federal government's going to help them, and everybody just wants to yawn and say that's been going on all my life. What's new? And it's difficult because you have to constantly tell people there is something new. There really is something different going on. There really is a new threat. We really are going to lose if we don't fight it again. And it's hard to just keep people constantly reminded that our water and therefore our economic future is constantly under threat from people downstream. Colorado is obligated under interstate compacts and treaties to give way more than half of its water to other states. There are 40 million people in the Colorado Basin alone who depend on water that originates in Colorado. But we're also subject to compacts like that on the Arkansas and the South Platte, the Republican River, and all of the rest. And so no matter how much water does or doesn't fall on Colorado in the wintertime, we don't get to use a lot of it under these interstate compacts. And And yet we're constantly having all these other states demand that we give them more and more and more and more. And we're not going to do it. That's why we have interstate compacts, to protect Colorado's own ability to grow and to use its water. And water, of course, is, as you know, at the heart of everything that we do in this state. Our congressman, our old Congressman Wayne Aspinall, who used to chair the House Interior Committee decades ago, used to say in Colorado, when you touch water, you touch everything. And that's as true today as it was when he said it.
Greg, you wrote a paper for the Independence Institute titled Life is Written in Water. There are some interesting, just sort of facts about water in Colorado. We only get, what, 16 and a half inches of moisture a year, roughly. I mean, that's an average. Which means there are years that are going to be much lower than that. There will be years that will be more than that. And something else you talked about, water that originates in Colorado. From what I understand, Colorado is the only state besides Hawaii where all the water flows out. No water flows into the state. All of our water flows out. Is that correct?
It's been called the rooftop state for that reason, for a long, long time. Technically, there are two small rivers that flow over the border into Colorado and then back out again. But there are eight major river basins in the state, all of which originate in the headwaters in this state, and all of which flow out. So it's exactly right.
So from that, what do Coloradans need to know besides the fact that we've got to fight for it? Things like, I mean, for instance, where I live up in northern, Colorado, northeastern Colorado in Weld County, where we have been fighting for additional storage, I feel like for my entire life almost, but that I'm exaggerating because I'm not that young. But I want to say the Northern Integrated Supply Project, it was conceptually, sort of designed in the 80s, and it still isn't built.
Yes, yes, but the desire to store more water is way older than that, and older than you. That goes clear back into the 1950s with the passage of the Colorado River Storage Projects Act. And I mean, this really started in the 1920s when they first made the interstate compact on the Colorado River, where Colorado only agreed to dedicate permanently, in a legal sense, a portion of its water to downstream states in exchange for their support of a bunch of water projects all over Colorado, some of which were on the Eastern Plains, including the Narrows Project. So this battle is older than any of us, and there's a simple reason for that, Amy. We can't control how much snow falls in Colorado. It's one of the great ironies of dealing with it in this state. Water anywhere, of course, is a function of nature, but in Colorado, 80% of our water comes in about a 4 month period in the form of snow. And then as soon as it starts to melt, it races as fast as it can to the oceans. And we can't control how much snow comes in Colorado. We can only control how much of it we store during the wet periods in order to use during the dry period. That we can control. And so that's where the battle is never going to be um, about the amount of precipitation. The battle's all going to be about storage, and it always will be and always has been.
Let me just ask one more concept, and then Jake, I'm sorry. Explain first in time, first in line, and what that means in Colorado and actually in Western states. It's not just Colorado. All Western states have a different view of water than our Eastern brethren.
Yes, and it's hard to describe, but those of us who spent time in Washington D.C. spent a lot of time trying to explain Western water systems to people in the East who just have trouble understanding it. Their problem is too much water. It's a constant battle to figure out how to get rid of it. And so in the East, when you talk about water issues, you're almost always talking about water quality, where here we're talking about water supply, completely different thing. Um, and it's not hard to understand why. If you think about just the differences in the amount of water between the green part of the country and the brown part of the country. In Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway, there's more water in the Potomac River in that 20-mile stretch than in the entire 1,400-mile reach of the Colorado River and all of its tributaries. So of course it's hard for people there to understand why water is so dear and such a dire battle all the time out west.
To that point, I kind of want to touch on bringing it up to speed now. It's my understanding that some portions of the interstate compact that governs a lot of Colorado's water are set to expire by the end of next year, and that's created this whole raft of new studies and commissions and negotiations amongst the states. Can you explain, what the fight is, where are the battle lines being drawn, what should Coloradans care about in terms of those negotiations, and ultimately, what should the ideal policy be?
Yes, but let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. Interstate compacts do not expire. The Interstate Compact on the Colorado River was written in 1922. It was ratified by all 7 states, and ratified by Congress and signed by the president. It's right below the level of the Constitution, as is a treaty, and it supersedes statutes in that respect. The Upper Colorado River Basin, the 4 states in the Upper Basin, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, did a separate compact in 1948 about how they're going to distribute their water, because the original interstate compact essentially divided the river in half. Half of it gets to be used by the upper basin and half by the lower basin, the dividing line being right below Lake Powell. So in the upper basin, how do those 4 states allocate the water among themselves? We have a separate compact for that purpose, under which Colorado gets 51%, and the other portions divided proportionally based on population and land in a complex formula. But we adopted that in the 1940s. In the lower basin, they never did a compact like that. In fact, they sued each other instead. And so, under a whole series of court cases under the general umbrella of Arizona v. California, the Supreme Court had to decide how to allocate waters in the lower basin, and made the Interior Secretary the water master of the lower basin. Now, in more recent years, we've had the Interior Secretary and the Bureau of Reclamation under Interior try to insert itself into the management in the upper basin as well, and trying to decide, now that we have a drought and now that the Colorado River has less water than it had in the 1920s, now how are we going to divvy it up? It's an authority that in the upper basin, the Interior Department does not have. And Colorado should always insist that the Bureau of Reclamation stay out of that, because our water is administered under the Upper Colorado River Compact by an Upper Colorado River Commission. Those compacts, all of them, were approved by Congress, signed by the president, signed by all the states. There's nothing the Bureau of Reclamation can do to force Colorado to use less water than it's entitled to. But they still try. So what you're referring to, Jake, is these drought agreements that have come along periodically, and there's one in place now that expires at the end of the year, the next year. And the Bureau is essentially been, for 2 or 3 years, has been demanding that all these states come up with some kind of a plan for how they're going to use less water, a plan that's acceptable to them in Washington, or threatening, if we don't do that, that they will step in, um, over the interstate compact, and that they will decide how to administer the river. Upper Colorado River Commission and Colorado essentially have said to them, no, you won't. It's an authority you don't have in the upper basin. So 3 years in a row with that threat pending, the Bureau has essentially backed down and decided to implement some process in the lower basin, always, all 3 times, taking water away from Arizona and giving more to California. That's an outrageous outcome that nobody is happy about, nor should they be. But it isn't Colorado's business. If in the lower basin, if California wants to steal water from Arizona, I guess we can argue about whether we should care about that. But when they want more water from Colorado, that we should care about.
How do
And
they do?
especially, let me just add one thing to that. We have in the upper basin absolutely no reason to have any sympathy for California on this issue at all. It not only has it abused the interstate compact by taking more water out of the Colorado River than it's entitled to for 75 years. Not only that, but also California sits on 800 miles of coastline on the largest body of water on Earth. So for them to come to Colorado, which is desperately water short, and say we need more of your water, is just plain silly. And for us to even entertain the concept of that is a huge threat to the future of Colorado. We ought to say, why don't you do what 17 other countries all over the world are doing and desalinate water out of the ocean? You got more water than you know what to do with if you would do that. It's an economic issue, but they keep turning it into a political thing that Colorado has to go to battle over.
Hey, Greg, talk about it. One of the things on the compact, it has to do with the color, the flow of the river. And you argue that it should be whatever the current flow is. So if the water's low, the lower basin should not be getting as much water because it's not there. And I think what they're using, and correct me if I'm wrong, is an average right now as opposed to what the actual flow of the river is. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are the way we're administering the river now uh, is a complete bastardization of the interstate compact and what it intended. Dividing the river in half and saying upper and lower basins each get half. I'm I think we should still be okay with that as we've always been. But at the time, there were 15 million acre feet a year in the Colorado River, and today there's something less than that, 12 or 13 million. So the Bureau of Reclamation wants to come in and say, therefore, Colorado has to use less water, but that's not obviously the right answer. The right answer is to say, okay, there's only 13 million acre feet or whatever it is. So we still should split the river in half, and everybody's proportion should still be the same. If we did that, Colorado would get about the same amount of water it's getting now because it's the only state that uses less than its entitlement. But California, instead of being entitled to 4.4 million acre feet, would be entitled to 3.8. That makes more sense if that's what the river is actually holding. The idea that somehow Colorado negotiators in the 1920s agreed to supply a fixed amount of water, no matter what the flow of the river was, in perpetuity, that just defies common sense. There's no way that's what they had in mind at the time. So we ought to just say, I've got the two things that I think we should change. One is give them the amount of water that they would proportionately be entitled to based on the average of what's there now. But secondly, before the Bureau of Reclamation comes in telling everybody else what to do, the government should acknowledge its own role in reducing the flow of the Colorado River. And I've written numerous columns about this, but the reality is we have millions of acre feet less water in the river than there should be because of bad forest management and because of the presence of non-native species all along all of the rivers of the West. If you could fix either of those two problems, you'd find the millions of acre feet of missing water.
Yeah, can you touch
You've
on? I
you've
was just about
focused,
to ask that question, Greg,
yeah,
because
please.
you mentioned we can't control precipitation, but there are certain things we can do to try to better improve the water supply every year. You mentioned forest management, invasive species. Can you explain why that is and why that harms the availability of regular amounts of water?
Yeah, but let's start by just underlining the point you just made. If you draw a line on the chart of the flow of the Colorado River, you can see it declining over steadily over a long period of time. If you draw a line on a similar kind of chart about the amount of snow coming in Colorado, you will not see it declining by that same level. So where's that extra water going? The first thing is called evapotranspiration, which is a complicated government word that just means not all the water that's falling on the state is getting to the rivers. And that's because of the overgrowth of the national forests. So there's so many trees out there where in a natural condition there might have been 50 trees per acre and there are 900 to 1,000 now. That's why we've lost 200 nearly 200 million acres of forest to catastrophic wildfires in the last 25 years because of this poor forest management that has allowed this dramatic overgrowth of trees and brush and grasses and all the stuff that the fuel load, as they call it, that fills the national forest now. So the Bureau of Reclamation recommended it or estimated at one time that there was just under 4 million acre feet of water in the West lost to evapotranspiration, where it literally evaporates off the trees before it ever gets to the ground, or when it gets to the ground, is sucked up by too many trees before it ever gets to the river. So that doesn't mean that the snow isn't falling anymore. It means that because of bad public land management, a lot of it's never getting to the rivers. That's one side of it. The other side of it is non-native species, especially tamarisk and Russian olives. Those are some of the thirstiest plants known to nature. The government studies estimated that a tamarisk tree, a single tree, could drink 200 gallons of water a day. That's 4 times more than a native cottonwood tree drinks. And they're not native, they're highly invasive. They have spread over all of the rivers and tributaries of the entire southwestern United States. They occupy today something like 3 million acres. So if you just do a quick, simple math and figure out the density of tamarisk trees, there's roughly 3,000 per acre in most of those areas. Um, you can figure out fairly quickly that's more than 2 billion tamarisk trees. And if you add that up times 200 gallons a day per, you will find fairly easily that if all of that was removed, you would have constructed the biggest water project in Western history. You would have created well over 3 million acre feet of water that's being lost to that. So between evapotranspiration, meaning bad forest management, and the presence of non-native species, which the government has spent millions of dollars studying but no dollars removing, you would find where all the missing water went. One caveat I have to put on that, though, and that is to say that government scientists now dispute their own findings. They cited those numbers that I just ticked off. They cited those numbers about tamarisk for 30 years um, because they wanted government money. They literally wanted $50 million to remove tamarisk all over the West. And then all of a sudden, one day, they decided that they were going to blame the shortage of water not on non natives or evapotranspiration, but on global warming. So suddenly, tamarisk isn't the big threat that it was once said to be. And so now they say it doesn't actually drink any more water than a native cottonwood tree, which I don't care. I'm not a scientist, but if you even if you assume that the native cottonwood trees didn't occupy anywhere near the acreage that tamarisk does, and so some percentage of that water would return if you eliminated tamarisk. They just don't want to do it. They want to blame the whole narrative on global warming and climate change, and completely ignore the government's own role in reducing the amount of water in the river. So I say, let's divvy up the water based on how much is already there, and let's fix the government management problem so the amount of water already there will be what it ought to be.
Hey, Greg, is there some kind of legal or administrative ruling that that I don't know that requires the upper basin to assume that the flow must or to assume that what they must deliver downstream is based on that 15 million, that 15 million number? I mean, is there something that's forcing them to do that? Who's deciding that? Why are we not doing it on what the actual flow is?
Well, it's a little bit complicated. It was decided by the Interstate Compact based on that 15 million acre foot number.
Okay.
So the way the compact works, the upper basin is supposed to deliver to the lower basin 7.5 million acre feet a year on a rolling 10-year average. So if we're short of that one year, we got to make it up in some future year so that over a 10-year period, there would have been 75 million acre feet. That's been the way the compact has been administered forever. We don't have the ability as a state or even as 4 upper basin states, we don't have the ability to just arbitrarily change that ourselves because for one simple reason, the Bureau of Reclamation owns the dam. And so they all of the employees who operate the head gates work for the Bureau of Reclamation. And so they can arbitrarily decide, as they did a couple years ago, for example, to just drain Blue Mesa Reservoir and to take half the water out of Flaming Gorge Reservoir, put it in Lake Powell, and then send it to California. They did that without even the courtesy of thinking they had to tell people in Colorado that was coming. So you had people whose business and livelihood depends on water in Blue Mesa Reservoir left high and dry and didn't even see it coming. That's how discourteous this whole process has become, and how just frankly adversarial it has become. And I don't think it needs to be that way. If we would adopt the sort of average approach to it that I mentioned earlier, it wouldn't be that big a question. We can work on federal land management, thinning the forest to a more natural condition. That's going to take some years, but in the meantime, we could at least be releasing from Lake Powell the amount of water the lower basin ought to be entitled to based on the average of what water's actually there.
Can I just ask Amy if you have any last thoughts? I'll give you the last question, but I just sort of, this is maybe a political question, but why has it been that California has been allowed to, receive more water than it's due under this sort of compact, where states like Colorado get the short end of the stick? Is it just because the clout that the state enjoys as such a large state? Is it political? What exactly? Why does California keep getting away with this essentially?
That is the short answer to the question. They're so big population wise, so politically so much more powerful. They have more congressmen, than all of the upper basin states combined. And so there has been an arrogance about California's approach to this that's just been off-putting all of my life. When I was at the state Department of Natural Resources, touring Southern California was a real eye-opener to me when we were having these water negotiations with California. Touring the Imperial Valley was bizarre, where they're still operating. I mean, it's the fruit and vegetable basket of America, but they were still operating miles and miles and miles of farms with open furrow irrigation in 125-degree sun, where they're losing half the water to evaporation. There wasn't at that time, there've been a little updating since then, but at that time there wasn't one single square inch of concrete ditches or gated pipe or drip water irrigation. So the things that Colorado farmers were doing generations ago, they still were refusing to do in the Imperial Valley, because they had a water right under their law that literally said such water as they may in their judgment need to irrigate that many acres. You couldn't get a water right in Colorado that way. You can only get a water right in this state with a decree from a water court that says exactly how much, for exactly what purpose, for which beneficial use, on how many acres. All of the details of it are part of the decree, and you can't abuse water that way. There's a rule against that in Colorado that doesn't exist in California, and they've just never been forced to do that because of their political clout. But for the federal government's power to be used against the upper basin for the benefit of California is an outrage. And our congressmen and senators shouldn't put up with it. No governor in the state's history on either side has ever agreed to any concept of rewriting the interstate compact or giving more upper basin water to the lower basin. That's been an absolute line in the sand from the very beginning, and it still ought to be.
Last question for you, and this is, we'll get off Colorado River for just a second. Why is Nebraska suing Colorado?
Well, it's actually a fairly similar issue. We also have an interstate compact on the South Platte River, and Nebraska makes the point that Colorado irrigators in northeast Colorado have lowered the water table by irrigating more acres than they should have for the amount of water they're entitled to under the compact. And so Nebraska is threatening to literally condemn land in Colorado so that they can build a canal from the South Platte into Nebraska and take back the water they're entitled to. It's a political battle that in a legal sense, it's a political battle they might win. But the reality is, the idea that they're going to condemn land in another state to take water, that's probably never going to happen. But it is a huge threat to Colorado, and the right solution to it, as Jerry Sonnenberg advocated when he was in the legislature, the right solution isn't a big giant lawsuit between the two states. The right solution is to build for the two states to pool their resources and build additional storage that'll benefit both. It's not that hard to solve, actually. We have we lose some of Colorado's entitlement even in the South Platte River every year just because we don't have enough storage capacity to store all of the water we're entitled to. And if we did that, we wouldn't have this big battle with Nebraska. We could store water for Colorado and Nebraska. That's what we ought to be doing.
Yeah, as we're coming up on time here, Amy, I'll give you some time to do our takeaways, but I just want to thank Greg for coming on the show. I would love to go further. There's so many topics that we could have hit there, and the impediments to storage, and if he's willing, we'll have to have him back on the show. But Amy, can you give some takeaways to our listeners here on this topic?
Yeah, I think there's another reason to find California hubris so offensive.
Yeah.
We have yet another reason to find, whether it's bringing their bad politics and policies into our state, or just their sort of their entitlement, their feeling of entitlement to our water. So that'd be one. Two is, Greg said it early, we have to control what we can control. And that means forest management. And I think this is a topic that some of our state think tanks should be looking at: forest management, what we can do with the feds. we have to have better practices of forest management. And then storage. So those two things, control what you can control. We can control forest management and we can control storage. 3, and Greg also said this, so Greg is really the inspiration for all of these. 3 is we have to fight for our water. This has to, if we don't fight for it, we're going to lose it. And so many people take it for granted the way we take our energy for granted. They think the power comes when you flip the switch. They think the water comes when you turn on the faucet. And that's not true. There's a whole process that happens before it even gets to your, from the city's main pipe into your kitchen. So California, we're still finding you offensive. Control what we can control, forest management and storage, and 3, fight for our own water.
Here, here. But that does it for us on another episode here of PowerGab. If folks like what you saw, you can head over to powergab.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every single week. We're also available wherever you get your audio shows, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you want to reach out to us to suggest future show topics or other great guests you'd like to see us interview here, you can send those our way at info@powergab.org. We always love hearing from you guys. But until next week, we'll see you.